Hello and welcome to Filling the Sink, a podcast from Catalan News. My name is Beth Cohen and today we'll be talking about the Sixena murals. The Sixena murals are 12th century Romanesque wall paintings from the Monastery of Santa María de Sixena in Aragon. They were moved to Barcelona during the Spanish Civil War for preservation and are currently on display at the National Art Museum of Catalonia in Barcelona. On this week's podcast, we explore the ongoing debate over their ownership, which highlights deeper regional and cultural tensions in Spain. Our reporter Cillian Shields went to MNAC to see the frescoes in person.
We're standing in room 16 of the MNAC's Romanesque medieval art wing. The MNAC is Catalonia's national art museum, and I'm in a very nicely air-conditioned room in this late June Catalan heat, and the air conditioning has to be so precise here because this room is housing precious works of art, medieval Romanesque monastery paintings, which date back to the 12th and 13th centuries. These are the wall paintings of the Sixena convent, and I'm here to catch a glimpse of these murals, these precious Romanesque wall paintings from the Monastery of Santa María de Sixena in Aragon. One of the first, most striking things I think about these paintings that I noticed upon arrival are the fact that they seem to have a lot less colour on them than all of the other rooms that I passed through to get here. I wonder if this is actually a process of the very particular history of these paintings, because I mentioned earlier on, these paintings were originally from the monastery in Sixena in Aragon. They're not originally from Catalonia, and that is a source of contention for many people. It has been the core of an ongoing controversy that has made it all the way to the Spanish Supreme Court over the past couple of decades. And the history that is so particular, and the fact that these wall paintings were from a convent that was burned down by anarchist militias during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. Now, shortly after that, a Catalan art historian found the ruins and immediately recognised their value. And he encouraged the Catalan authorities at the time to send over some money in order to recover these paintings, in order to preserve them, to save them from possible permanent elimination, basically. And they were eventually brought back to Barcelona. They were restored, they were cared for, and for nearly 100 years they've been preserved here in pretty decent condition. And I'm basking in this history, but this may be one of the last times that anybody gets to enjoy these frescoes, at least here in Catalonia, because there's much more to these paintings than just medieval art history. See, these fresco paintings are at the centre of a huge controversy between Catalonia and Aragon, where they're originally from. And this controversy centres on their location here in Barcelona, questions of custodianship, who has the right to keep hold of them and display them. Obviously, right now, they are in Catalonia, but Aragon have been fighting for decades to have them returned there. Not long ago, the Spanish Supreme Court actually ordained that they should be returned to Aragon, in fact. These murals were painted around 1200, 1300, more or less. They're comparable in style to those of the Sant Climent de Taüll in Catalonia. Plenty of those frescoes I've actually walked past in order to get to this room. And they were originally decorated the chapter house in the monastery in Sixena. These are very, very rare works, and as we're going to hear just now, they are very equally important to both Aragon and to Catalonia, but for very different kind of reasons, touching on culture and history and identity. So in order to find out more about their background, their cultural significance, and to find out what can be done with the modern 21st century controversy that surrounds where they should be, the difficulties that would entail transferring them to Aragon, as has been ordained by the Supreme Court, I had a chat with art historian Albert Velasco, who very generously gave me his time to explain all about these paintings and the modern controversy behind them.
I'm Alberto Velasco González, and I'm a teacher in the Universitat de Lleida in heritage issues, also in art medieval questions. These paintings are a very important set from final part of the 12th century and the beginning of the 13th century, and they are a very clear example of a very specific style called 1200 style.
So obviously these paintings have a very particular importance in terms of history and art history, but they also have a lot of importance for Catalan culture in a contemporary sense. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What do these paintings mean for Catalonia today?
Yes, Sixena is a monastery in the Aragon region, but it's a very important monastery in the ancient crown of Aragon. Also, the monastery was the place where the kings were buried, and also it's the place where the kings had their archives. And for instance, the monastery of Sixena is a very important example of the Catalan links, the Catalan relations with Aragon and with the rest of the territories that were part of the crown of Aragon. Not only for this, but also because in the beginning of the 20th century, here in Catalonia, there was a very important movement of recovering of the medieval examples of art, painting, the sculptures, goldsmiths, etc. And the medieval art was a very important part of this political and cultural discourse of Catalonia, because the origins of the nation were in the medieval period. And for these reasons, the museum became a very important point of explanation about the nation and the origins of the nation, and for these reasons, the museum became one of the most important museums in the world about medieval art.
Tell me about a little bit more about the history of how these fresco paintings ended up in Barcelona. What happened during the Civil War, and what efforts did the Catalan authorities do to keep them in good condition? What happened in the last 100 years of these paintings?
Well, in the Spanish Civil War, it was a disaster for the monastery of Sixena. It was a disaster because the paintings were burned in the context on the complete burning of the monastery. And in 1936, the paintings were very, very, very damaged as a result of this burning. In this moment, Josep Gudiol Ricard, an important art historian in Catalonia, asked to the Generalitat de Catalunya from some money to undertake to start the process of taking the painting from the wall. In the 60s, in the 20th century, the museum became the custodian of the paintings, and they take very, very care of these very, very, very fragile paintings. The museum is the best place for these paintings to be.
But Aragon, on the other side, they view this act of removing the paintings and keeping them in Catalonia for the last century, more or less, they view this as basically a form of theft, a form of almost robbing the paintings. Do you think that's fair to say?
This is not fair, and this is not true, because all the efforts Gudiol did to preserve, to take the paintings to Barcelona, to maintain the paintings, is not a theft. It's a very important operation of preservation. And in this way, this operation was interpreted by the main important associations and institutions at the same moment of the Spanish Civil War in the international context. The international context said that Gudiol did a great, great job and not a theft.
If we were to consider the paintings today, what is the current context of them? The Supreme Court have ordered them to be moved, but the technicians from the museum side and from Catalonia side say that this is a very risky operation. What can you tell me about the state that they're in today? Is it genuinely a risky operation to move them? Why would that be the case?
Yes, as the conservators said, there are a great deal of risks, in plural, with this installation of the paintings in Sixena. for this reason, at this moment, we are very worried about the decision of the courts, because we are saying that the first question is the conservation of the paintings, and the second question is who is the owner of the paintings and who had the decision to decide about the future of the painting.
Well, one way or another, the Supreme Court has decided that they should be removed and brought back to Aragon. But if I can ask you, is it possible to remove them safely?
It's important to clarify this, because it's not only a question of a trip. The question is that the paintings, afterward the trip, need to live in the monastery from the everlasting. This is very important, because the conditions of humidity and temperature in the monastery need to be with very, very stability. Mm-hmm. And not only this, it's important the architectural conditions, and it's important several items that are important for this new living of the paintings for the everlasting, because we have the obligation to send this painting for the generations in the future. The arcs in Sixena have, at this moment, a very important process of degradation, and these arcs in Sixena have not the same measurements that the arcs in the Museu Nacional d'Art de Catalunya with the paintings are different. And for this reason, the arcs in Barcelona are not with the same measurements that the arcs in Sixena. And this is one of the most important problems to do the operation. It's not possible to install the arcs in Barcelona in the arcs in Sixena.
Thanks to Albert Velasco for speaking with us, and thank you, Cillian, for your reporting and for joining me here in the studio.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Albert seems very clear that in order to preserve the paintings, it would be best to leave them exactly where they are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's coming at this from a point of view of preserving these very precious, very historic works. And, well, the way he sees it, it would be a very difficult operation to move them from Catalonia to Sixena without damaging them. I mean, we have to remember these are actually now built into the structure of the MNAC museum, so it would be a tricky operation to remove them, yeah.
And so before we get into the legal aspects, can we explore the main arguments in favour of and against their return?
Well, yeah, I mean, Aragon want them back because they view the murals as an integral part of Aragonese heritage, and they say that they should be returned to their original setting. The removal, though justified at the time for conservation in the midst of a war context, it was never meant to be permanent also. We have to keep that in mind too. Aragon says that the artworks were taken without proper authorization, especially considering the chaotic wartime context, obviously, at the time.
Mm-hmm. And what's Catalonia's position?
Well, they say that the murals were rescued from destruction. They carefully restored them. They employed experts. They had a financial outlay to save them, essentially. The MNAC Museum has preserved and exhibited them for decades as well, making them accessible to scholars, to the public. And they say that moving them now would jeopardise their condition as they are so delicate.
Which is Albert's viewpoint. And actually, since we interviewed Albert, he's resigned from his position at the Museum in protest against the government's position on the Sixena murals.
Yes, precisely, yes. He's against the Catalan government's stance, we should point out, because obviously there's an Aragonese government, there's a Spanish government, and the Catalan government, Velasco says that the Catalan government are working against the interests of the MNAC and against Catalan heritage. The Catalan government say that they are up for transferring the works back to their original Aragonese location. And they also reportedly last week removed references to the mural's fragility from the records of a meeting that they had. And this was a particular point of contention for Velasco. He was very strong in his criticism for removing references to their fragility. He even called for resignations within the culture department. He called the Catalan government's actions reprehensible and undignified, so really strong words here. And again, in his statement that he published online, he highlighted the fragility of the murals, and he said that he views the Catalan government's decision to remove these references of this fragility as blackmail.
Yes, in his statement, he mentions that the MNAC is the main museum for medieval and Romanesque painting, and it's being dispossessed of a key work, which is something unprecedented in the world of museums. And this is a long-running legal battle, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, back in 2015, a court in Aragon ordered the murals to be returned. They asserted that they belonged to state heritage of Aragon. Then, very interestingly, 2 years later, 2017, obviously Catalonia was in the midst of its independence push, and as a response, the Spanish central government applied Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution, which meant that Catalan autonomy was dissolved, so the Catalan government was rendered ineffective. And well, during this period, that is when they enforced the return of some other artworks from Sixena that was in the Museum of Lleida, actually, at that time. And a lot of people from the Catalan side, particularly the very Catalanist side, the very pro-independence side, they viewed this as authorities taking advantage of the fact that Catalonia's police force, Catalonia's government was rendered ineffectual in order to then go into the museum and remove a significant amount of artworks, obviously returning them to Sixena, where they were originally from.
Of course, these were artworks which weren't damaged by the transfer. However, the murals themselves, for logistical reasons, remained in Barcelona.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, they've been built into the structure of the museum building. Like it's really exceptional when you walk into the room and you see it's sort of a museum, but it feels a little bit like, the medieval convent. Like it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. So who are the current key players in the dispute, and what are the latest developments?
Yes, so maybe this is good to kind of go over. It's obviously Aragon, the Aragonese administration executive, that's pushing most strongly for the return of the artworks to Sixena. And then over the other side, you've got the Catalan side. There's currently a working group that has been established in recent months to organise the transfer of these works back to Sixena, and that is comprised of the Spanish government, the Catalan government, the Barcelona City Council, and it also has participation from the Aragonese government, as well as the MNAC Museum themselves. That's the working group that's in charge of overseeing the transfer of these works. But obviously within that, you've got some differing opinions. Like the Aragonese side are pushing most strongly for it to be done immediately. And in fact, tomorrow from when we're recording, which will be Friday, the 27th of June, the Aragonese administration is going to present an appeal to a judge in Huesca, in Aragon, in order to carry out the forced removal of those works and bring them back to Sixena. And to be honest, the Aragonese president has been very strong in his words. He's been demanding that they be returned in whatever condition, basically. A quote from him was, a las bonas o a las malas, like whether they come out in a good condition, in a good state, or maybe not. It seems like he's just wants them back immediately, and he is not really giving as much consideration to the ideas that they could be potentially fragile and that they could be potentially damaged by maybe a less considered transfer of these works.
Yes, because forced removal sounds stressful and rushed and possibly not in the best interest of the artwork.
No, precisely. It would be a case of police officers, Guardia Civil, probably going in and I don't know how, but it's not really taking into account the opinions of the technicians who one would like to think should be at the forefront of any decisions being made.
Mm-hmm. In the best interests of the works. Now, this case isn't unique. It's the one that's in the headlines at the moment, and it's one that's very close to our hearts in Catalonia. But there have been very similar cases, and I'd like to draw some parallels, perhaps, with the British Museum.
Yeah, that's one that I think is very common, at least in the popular imagination, at least of people in the English-speaking world. The British Museum is, I was actually there last weekend, funny enough, but it's one that's like so commonly criticised as having so many artefacts which are effectively just loot and plunder from the colonial time. The museum is full of priceless things of heritages from all over the world, from all corners of the globe. And yet there's a current conversation about whether these artifacts should be returned to their original lands, whether this, the fact that they are there on display in the British Museum, whether that amounts to, displaying their plunder. But yeah, there's obviously similar kind of questions of custodianship, questions of ownership that can be drawn here in comparison with Catalonia holding very priceless artworks which were originally Aragonese. I'd also just like to draw a contrast, however, though. Like the British Museum is full of amazing works. Genuinely, it's one of the most amazing museums that I've been to. The things that I saw there, the Rosetta Stone, the astrolabes from like ancient Islamic science. Like as a museum visitor, it is phenomenal to visit. But, you know, thinking about it in more conceptual terms, ethically, is it right that they're on display here in London rather than in their country of origin? It's a messy question. I suppose one that maybe hit home a little bit closer to me as an Irish person was I saw something called the Kells Crozier, which was a magnificent silver and copper alloy case containing a yew wood crozier, like a hooked staff. And it's believed to be a relic of an early Irish saint. And I didn't even know that this was there when I visited it, but it was absolutely stunning to see. But the last line of the piece of information just kind of displayed a little bit of a sort of a lackadaisical perspective of how this got there. It was incredible. It said, it was found behind a London solicitor's cupboard in 1850 and was purchased by the British Museum a decade later. It was just found behind a cupboard. So that's just one example of a piece on display there in the British Museum. But everything that's on display there were forcibly removed from colonial times. The Sixena murals, which are on display in Catalonia, which are originally from Aragon, they don't arrive in a different land in a colonial context. They arrive in a context of, okay, it was a civil war, these were on the brink of being damaged, possibly lost forever, and it happened to be a Catalan art historian who found them and who encouraged the Catalan government at the time to invest some money into preserving them. Now, there's very fair questions that can be asked today over where they should be. Questions that I don't really think that I have an answer for. But I would like to draw that contrast between rescuing works in the mad context of a war and, well, the British Empire removing very important heritage items from their colonial lands.
All of these cases raise questions about ownership and preservation of cultural heritage. At the time of recording, courts continue to deliberate over the Sixena murals. Aragon continues to push for their return, while Catalonia insists on the fragility and conservation issues. We'll be following the debate closely and hope that whatever decision is made, it's in the interests of preserving this unique piece of cultural heritage. Well, that's almost all we have time for today. But before we go, it's time for our Catalan phrase of the week. Cillian, what do we have?
This week, we've got a nice one. We've got a nice one to kind of calm everybody down, settle the nerves a little bit. We've got compartir es viure.
To share is to live.
Exactly. Quite simple, but gets to the point.
That's one you hear quite a lot, especially in schools and social campaigns. And it expresses the idea that sharing is an essential part of a meaningful life and fosters a sense of community and human connection.
Very harmonious, very nice.
This week on Filling the Sink, we've been talking about the Sixena murals. Thank you to Albert Velasco for speaking with us, and thank you to Cillian for joining me here in the studio.
Thanks very much, Beth.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe to Filling the Sink wherever you get your podcasts if you haven't done so already. We'll be back again next week with another exciting episode of Filling the Sink. On behalf of all the team here at Catalan News, I'm Beth Cohen, wishing you a great weekend. Fins aviat. Adeu.